At a peaceful farm in rural Georgia, an elderly black woman has tended the land alone for decades, but her peace is quickly shattered when a group of white men arrives determined to take her land. They offer money, then threats, then violence, determined to force her off at any cost. What they don't know is that the woman they're up against was once an elite sniper, and they've just started a fight they cannot win. Before we continue, I would like to know where in the world you are watching this story from. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe so you never miss out on inspiring and impactful stories like this one. The early light crept slowly across the land, brushing soft gold against the tops of the pecan trees that bordered the old Daniels farm. 68 acres stretched out in every direction, a patchwork of deep green fields and faded fences stitched together by time and care. The house, a simple wooden structure with peeling white paint and a wide front porch, stood at the center like a sentinel of the past. Clara Daniels stood at the edge of that porch, a worn ceramic mug held steady in her right hand. The dark skin of her fingers curled around the chipped handle, her nails neatly trimmed. Her eyes, sharp and steady beneath the silver waves of hair pinned back from her face, swept slowly across the fields. No detail escaped her gaze, no blade of grass, no line in the soil. It was a habit formed over decades, a soldier's habit, and it had never left her. She wore a faded denim shirt buttoned to the throat, sleeves rolled carefully past her elbows. Her jeans, worn thin at the knees, were tucked into a pair of black leather boots cracked with age, but polished each week without fail. The lines on her face spoke of years lived hard and proud, not broken but etched with the truth of experience. The air was cool that morning, holding the damp scent of rain that had passed in the night. Clara took a sip of the coffee, its bitter warmth anchoring her to the present. Yet her thoughts, as they often did, wandered back. It had been 40 years since she and Thomas first stood on this land together, hands entwined, their shared vision wide as the Georgia sky. They had built everything here from nothing but sweat and grit, a home, a life, a legacy. Thomas, her husband, had passed 8 years ago. The ache of that loss had dulled with time, but the void remained constant as the soil beneath her boots. She could still hear his voice, sometimes soft and low as the wind through the pines. He had called her his steady shot. Clara Daniels, the quiet one, the sniper who never missed, the woman who brought calm to chaos in a world too often ruled by noise. She had served in 2 wars behind enemy lines where precision mattered more than numbers, where patience was a weapon. It was there she learned discipline, every breath measured, every movement deliberate. And it was here on this land that discipline found new meaning. The farm had become her new perimeter, every fence post, a point of defense, every tree line, a marker of watchfulness. A faint creak on the porch floor pulled her back. She shifted her weight, setting the mug down on the worn railing. Her steps were deliberate, her back straight as ever, not because age had spared her, but because she refused to yield to it. Inside the house was clean and orderly. Not for visitors, there were few, but because order was the language she understood best. The curtains were drawn just so the stove scrubbed after every meal, and the floor swept each morning before the sun cleared the ridge. On the mantel above the fireplace, a single photograph stood framed in dark oak. Thomas and Clara younger, then both in uniform, standing shoulder to shoulder beneath a tattered flag. Beside it, another frame held a picture of their son, Marcus, sharp-jawed and steady-eyed in his marine blues. Marcus had followed his father into the military, and then, like Clara, into the shadows of sniper work. He was a man shaped by discipline and forged by loyalty. These days, he worked as an independent engineer, building tactical systems for clients who valued skill over politics. He lived 2 hours away, but called often, always checking on his mother, always asking if the land was still safe. She would smile just faintly and tell him what he already knew. As long as she breathed, this land would remain theirs. Clara moved through the kitchen with practiced ease. Eggs were cracked into a cast-iron pan, bacon laid out with care. As the skillet hissed, her gaze drifted to the window above the sink. The field stretched beyond rows of young corn, catching the first true light of day. Every inch of this farm was familiar to her. The southern pasture where Thomas had taught Marcus to ride. The north field where they had picnicked beneath a canopy of stars. The creek bed that had once hidden their boyhood fort. Memories were layered into the soil here, bound tighter than any legal deed. And now, with Thomas gone and Marcus grown, Clara stood as the last keeper of those memories. The farm was more than property. It was her proof of survival, her promise kept. It was not for sale. It was not negotiable. She had seen too many outsiders come and go over the years, offering smiles, slick with false charm, waving fat checks like bait. But Clara knew better. No amount of money could replace the blood and bone buried in this ground. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the stillness. Clara's head lifted, heart beating a steady, unhurried rhythm. Through the window, she watched an unfamiliar pickup slow near the front gate. Two men inside, both wearing mirrored sunglasses and two clean boots. She didn't move to greet them. Not yet. Instead, she wiped her hands on a cloth, set the skillet aside, and retrieved her phone. A single tap opened the secure line Marcus had insisted she install. One ring. Two. His voice came through low and alert. "Morning, Mama. Everything all right?" She kept her tone calm. "Company out front. Not the friendly kind." A pause. "I can be there in 90 minutes. "No rush yet," Clara replied. "Just thought you'd want to know." "You keep eyes on 'em," he said, "and call again if they step foot past that gate." "I will." She ended the call and stood for a moment, gaze steady on the truck, now idling near the fence. The men inside were speaking, one gesturing toward the house with a lazy confidence Clara recognized all too well. City men thinking rural land meant easy pickings. They had no idea. Clara took a deep breath, smoothing the front of her shirt. Then she stepped onto the porch, her presence as rooted as the old oak beside the steps. She made no move to wave or welcome. The driver lowered his window. "Morning, ma'am," he called, voice slick with practice friendliness. "We're with Southeastern Development. Thought we'd stop by, see if you'd be open to a conversation about your land." Clara said nothing. Her gaze held steady, arms resting lightly at her sides. After a long beat, the driver cleared his throat. "It's a good offer. Market value and then some. Lot of folks around here taking the deal." Her voice, when it came, was calm as stone. "This land isn't for sale." Another pause. The driver forced a smile. "Well, maybe think it over. We'll leave our card." He set a business card on the post of the gate and drove off, tires spitting dust. Clara watched until they disappeared down the road. Only then did she step down, retrieve the card, and tear it clean in half. The pieces fluttered to the ground like dry leaves. As she straightened, a familiar voice echoed in her mind. Thomas, steady as ever. "It's not the fight you start that matters, Clara. It's the one you finish." She returned to the porch, her gaze once more sweeping the land. 68 acres of memory, of sweat and sacrifice. It was not for sale. It was not a commodity. It was the sum of a family's struggle and triumph woven into the earth. And as long as Clara Daniels drew breath, no one, not a company, not a sheriff, not a man with a briefcase full of promises would take it from her. The rain had come down hard the night before, soaking the earth until the ditches overflowed and the old wooden fence posts leaned under the weight of the waterlogged soil. By morning, a thick fog hung low over the fields of the Daniels farm. Clara stood by the kitchen window, watching rivulets of water snake down the glass. Her black fingers tapped lightly against the windowsill. Her gaze narrowed. She finished her coffee and pulled on her boots. The leather creaked faintly as she tightened the laces one by one. Outside, the air was heavy with the scent of wet grass and clay. Clara grabbed an old canvas jacket from the hook by the door, shrugged it on, and made her way out to check the property. The gravel drive was soft beneath her steps. Small streams of muddy water carved paths through the ditches. Clara's breath came steady and even as she walked the perimeter, her trained eyes moving constantly, reading the land, the trees, the sky. When she reached the northern field, something stopped her cold. The ditch that ran along the edge of the property had taken on a strange color. A sickly sheen floated on the surface of the runoff, iridescent against the brown water. Clara crouched slowly, her knees stiff but steady, and dipped 2 fingers into the water. A sharp chemical odor hit her nose. She drew back her hand and wiped her fingers clean on a cloth. Her pulse quickened. She rose and stepped farther into the field. The soil here had shifted overnight, new rivulets cutting through the top layer of dirt. Along the far fence line, a patch of earth caught her eye. It looked darker than the rest, the edges oddly defined. Clara approached it with measured steps. She knelt again, scooping a handful of the soil. It was damp, but not just from rain. There was an unnatural slickness to it. A memory surfaced clear and sudden. A village years ago. Oil seeping from the ground after a failed drilling operation. Locals sick and crops ruined. She had seen this before. Clara's chest tightened. Her mind snapped into focus. She wiped her hands clean and stood her gaze sweeping the horizon. There were no trucks in sight, no workers, but this wasn't natural. Someone had been here. Without a word, Clara turned back toward the house. Her steps quickened. Once inside, she moved to the study, a small room off the living room, lined with shelves of old books, war medals, and family photographs. From the bottom drawer of the roll-top desk, she pulled out an old, leather-bound notebook, Thomas's journal. She laid it on the desk, her fingers tracing the familiar scrawl on the cover before she opened it. The pages were filled with notes, crop rotations, maintenance logs, weather patterns. But deeper in the book toward the back, the writing changed. Clara flipped through the pages until she found what she was looking for. Subsurface gas pockets detected Northfield perimeter. Thomas had written the date marked nearly 20 years back. Potential natural gas reserves, high value, risk of exploitation if discovered. Clara exhaled slowly, her heartbeat steady but strong. Thomas had known. He had left this for her. She closed the journal and locked it back in the drawer. There was no doubt now someone had tested the soil. They had found what Thomas had tried to keep quiet for decades, and they would be back. That afternoon the sun broke through the clouds, drying the topsoil and drawing out a humid haze. Clara remained watchful. The shotgun leaned in its usual place by the door, loaded but unseen. Her phone sat within reach, Marcus's number already pinned to the top of her contacts. By late afternoon, the first sign came. A black pickup rolled slowly down the gravel road toward the Daniels farm. Clara spotted it from the porch, her eyes narrowing beneath the brim of her hat. The truck was new, the tires too clean for this part of Georgia. A second followed, then a third each, parking in a staggered line along the road just beyond her gate. No one had called. No one had written. No permission had been asked. Clara's jaw tightened. The driver of the first truck stepped out. A white man in his 40s, tall and lean, his dark suit jacket open over a crisp, button-down shirt. His smile was practiced, his movements smooth. He approached the gate with an air of entitlement that Clara had seen too many times in her life. He didn't wave. He simply unlatched the gate and stepped through as if he owned the place. Clara met him halfway, her boots crunching softly against the gravel. "Afternoon, ma'am," the man said, voice warm but measured. He held out a business card. "Name's Cole Thatcher. I represent Southern Energy Ventures. We've recently completed some exploratory surveys in the area. Turns out your property sits on a particularly promising deposit." He smiled wider as though they were old friends. Clara did not take the card. She kept her hands at her sides. "Southern Energy would like to make you an offer," Cole continued, "one that reflects the value of your land plus a generous bonus for your cooperation." His eyes flicked over her shoulder toward the house, then back to her face. Clara met his gaze without flinching. "This land is not for sale," she said, her voice calm but flat. Cole's smile faltered for half a second before he recovered. "Well now, ma'am, I understand your attachment to the place. Beautiful property, strong history, but progress waits for no one. And I'd hate to see you left behind while others benefit." Clara's fingers curled slightly at her sides. Her breath remained steady. "No one comes onto this land without my say-so," she said evenly, "and no one takes what belongs to my family." Cole's eyes narrowed just a fraction. The warmth in his tone faded. "I'm not here to strong-arm you," he said, "but I do advise you to think this over. Southern Energy has a lot of influence in this region. A deal now means peace and prosperity. Refusal." He let the sentence hang. Clara's voice was ice. "You have said your piece. Now turn around and leave." For a moment, Cole stood still, as if testing her resolve. Then he forced another thin smile and backed away. "Well, we'll be in touch," he said lightly. "I suggest you keep an open mind." He turned, signaling to the others. The trucks pulled out in slow formation, engines rumbling low. Clara watched them until they disappeared down the road. Only then did she allow herself a breath. Her pulse was steady, but her mind raced. This was no casual offer. They had tested the water, they had marked the soil, and now they had shown their hand. Clara stepped back onto the porch, her gaze hard. The memory of ambushes in foreign lands returned unbidden, the look in a man's eyes when he believed he held the upper hand. But they had underestimated her. She lifted her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. "They came today," she said. "Who's Southern Energy?" "A man named Thatcher. They know about the gas." A beat of silence. Then Marcus spoke, voice low and resolute. "I'm coming down this weekend. "We'll be ready." Clara's eyes swept the horizon once more. "No one crosses this line," she said softly, and in her heart the line had already been drawn. 2 days passed after the visit from Cole Thatcher. The sky remained overcast, as if the land itself shared Clara's unsettled mood. She moved through her days with quiet purpose, tending the animals, repairing a section of the northern fence, walking the property with a sharpened eye. The chemical stain in the ditch had not returned, but the scent of intrusion still hung in the air. That morning, while sweeping the porch, Clara spotted a manila envelope wedged between the slats of the front gate. No truck, no footprints, just the envelope sealed and stamped with the Southern Energy Ventures logo in bold black print. She stood still for a moment, the broom resting against her hip, her pulse steady. Then she walked to the gate, picked up the envelope, and carried it inside. At the kitchen table, Clara laid it flat, her dark fingers tracing the edge. She already knew what it contained. Still, with deliberate care, she opened it. Inside was a letter and a certified check. The letter, printed on thick, expensive paper, carried the same polished tone as Cole's voice. It spoke of opportunity and progress, of fair market compensation, and respect for family legacy. But the number typed at the bottom was the true message: 7 figures. More than enough to buy any house in the county, to send Marcus's future children to the best schools, to live in comfort for the rest of her days. Clara's jaw tightened. Her breath came slow and measured. She set the letter aside and stared at the check. For a long moment, her mind wandered. She thought of Thomas, how he had stood in this same kitchen sleeves, rolled up, wiping sweat from his brow after a day in the fields. He had never chased easy money. He had built a life grounded in values, honesty, pride, family. Then her gaze shifted to the small shelf by the doorway. A framed photo of Marcus as a boy sat there, worn edges tucked behind the glass. He couldn't have been more than 7 barefoot and beaming beneath the broad boughs of the old Bodhi tree in the west pasture. Clara could still remember that day. Marcus had climbed the tree all afternoon, refusing to come down even when the sun dipped low. Thomas had laughed, called it the spirit of his mother coming through. That tree still stood strong, and so would she. Clara rose from the table, every movement deliberate. She took the letter and the check, folding them carefully, then crossed the room to the old cast-iron stove. She opened the door, the scent of cold ash rising to meet her. Her hand did not shake as she fed the papers to the flames. The fire caught quickly edges, curling black ink, bleeding into smoke. Clara watched until nothing remained but fine gray powder. She closed the stove door with a soft click, her heart steady. This was no longer a negotiation. It was a fight. Not for money, not for convenience, for memory, for honor, for the name Thomas Daniels had carved into this land and the legacy she intended to protect. Later that afternoon, Marcus arrived. His truck rumbled up the drive just before dusk, headlights slicing through the gathering mist. Clara stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching him park beside the barn. He stepped out tall and solid in a worn leather jacket, jeans dusty from the road. His eyes searched her face as he approached. "You all right, Mama?" "I'm all right," she said, "but they're pushing harder." He frowned. "What happened?" She nodded toward the stove. "They left an offer." Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't need to ask where it was now. Clara reached for his arm. "We are not selling Marcus, not now, not ever." His gaze softened. He covered her hand with his own, strong and warm. "Never doubted that," he said. They sat on the porch as the sun dipped below the tree line. The air grew cool, and the night insects began their steady song. For a while they said nothing, the silence between them comfortable, resolute. Finally, Marcus spoke. "You know what this means, right?" Clara nodded. "They won't stop with letters." "No," she said quietly. "I don't expect them to." He looked out across the darkening fields. "Then we get ready." Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "You always were your father's son." Marcus met her gaze, eyes steady. "And you taught me well." They rose together, the unspoken understanding passing between them like a current. Inside, Clara retrieved Thomas's notebook once more. She laid it on the kitchen table, flipping to the marked pages. Marcus leaned over her shoulder, reading in silence. "Gas pockets," he said softly. "That's why they're coming." "Yes," Clara replied, "and your father meant for us to be ready." Marcus straightened, a voice calm but firm. "Then we will be." Clara closed the book and looked at her son. "I don't care how much money they wave in my face," she said. "This land is ours. It holds his blood, your childhood, my life's work." Marcus nodded. "No price on that." She exhaled slowly, her spine straight as ever. No price, she echoed. That night, as Clara moved through the house, locking doors and drawing curtains, her steps were steady, her mind clear. The warmth of the stove still lingered, but the flames had long died down. In the ashes lay the remnants of an offer meant to buy her soul, and with it a message burned deep into her heart. They would not take this land, not while she breathed, and not without a fight. The next morning dawned cold and gray, a sharp wind sweeping through the fields as if to warn of what was coming. Clara rose early, her body moving out of habit. She brewed her coffee, checked the locks, and laced up her boots. But something gnawed at her gut, a sense that the ground beneath her feet had shifted overnight. Marcus had left after dinner the evening before, promising to return soon with supplies and a few trusted friends. Clara had hugged him tight at the truck, her voice calm but low. "You watch your back, son. These men, they don't play fair." "I know, Mama," Marcus had said, his voice steady. "Neither do we." Now, standing on her porch, Clara felt the air prickling against her skin. The quiet was too sharp. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the truck. The plan was to drive into town for feed and a few essentials. As she approached the driver's side, her steps slowed. The front tire sagged low against the dirt, the rubber nearly flat. Clara knelt beside it, her dark fingers tracing the sidewall. A clean, straight cut ran along the inner edge, sharp, deliberate. Her heart beat harder, but her breath stayed even. She rose slowly, scanning the yard. No footprints, no stray vehicles. Her voice came out low. "So that's how you want to play it." Inside the barn, she pulled out the jack and spare, changing the tire with practiced efficiency. The cold air bit at her hands, but she paid it no mind. When the job was done, she stood for a moment, eyes narrowing at the distant tree line. The fight had begun. That night, Clara double-checked the locks, then sat in the old rocking chair by the window. The shotgun rested against the wall within easy reach. Her gaze swept the yard, lit only by the pale glow of the moon. Around midnight, a faint sound reached her ears. Not an animal, not the wind. Water, moving fast where it shouldn't. Clara rose, her body tense, and slipped on her boots. Flashlight in hand, she stepped outside, following the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, guiding her toward the well house. She stopped cold. A stream of water gushed from beneath the ground near the pump house, pooling into the grass. Clara knelt, teeth clenched. The main supply line had been severed clean, fresh cut marks gleaming in the flashlight beam. Her chest burned. She forced a breath through her nose, steadying her pulse. This wasn't vandalism. It was a message. They wanted her to feel exposed, vulnerable. They didn't know Clara Daniels. At dawn, she repaired the break with parts from her storage shed. The water would run again by evening. But in her gut, Clara knew this was only the beginning. Later that day, the blow that hurt deepest came. It was near sunset when she walked to the goat pen's feed bucket in hand. The animals stirred as usual, except for one. Daisy, her oldest nanny goat, lay still in the corner of the pen. The others circled wide around her. Clara dropped the bucket and rushed forward, heart thudding. She knelt beside the animal, her dark fingers searching for breath, for life. There was none. Foam marked Daisy's mouth. Her eyes were dull, her belly swollen. Poison. Clara's vision blurred, not from age, not from fear, but from a grief that struck straight to the heart. Daisy had been more than livestock. The goat had been with her through years of loss and rebuilding, a creature of simple loyalty and trust, and now someone had ended that life not from necessity, but from cruelty. Clara pressed a hand to the goat's side, her throat tightening. A voice surfaced in her mind, Thomas's voice. "Do not let them break you, Clara. They win only if you let them." Her breath shuddered. She rose stiffly, her face hardening. She buried Daisy beneath the old oak by the fence line, alone. No words spoken, no cross marked. The soil would remember. As the days wore on, the attacks shifted from the shadows into the open. In town, Clara felt the difference immediately. At the feed store where old Mr. Garner used to greet her with a warm smile, there was only silence. He glanced once in her direction, then quickly away. At the diner, familiar faces avoided her gaze. Neighbors who had once shared coffee now crossed the street when she walked past. At church, a coldness had settled in the pews around her, the empty spaces speaking louder than words. Fear had spread, fear and silence. Clara's back remained straight. She held her head high, her dark eyes calm as she moved through the town that had turned its back. She understood the game: divide, isolate, intimidate. But the tactics only fueled her resolve. One evening, as she stood on her porch watching the sun sink behind the trees, her phone buzzed. "Marcus," she answered quickly. "Mama, how bad is it?" Her voice was low but clear. "They've started. Tires. Waterline. Daisy's gone. Folks here won't meet my eyes." A pause, then Marcus's voice tight with anger. "Cowards. They know who's behind this?" "They know," Clara said, "but they're too scared to speak." Marcus's breath came hard through the line. "I'll be there tomorrow. We'll lock it down." Clara looked out over the fields, her voice steady. "You bring who you trust. No more. No less. Always, Mama." She ended the call, her fingers tightening around the phone. The isolation burned sharper than any blade. These were her neighbors, her community, people she had stood beside at weddings, at funerals. And now, with fear in their hearts, they chose silence over justice. But Clara Daniels had fought alone before. She would fight again. That night, beneath a sky heavy with stars, she sat by the old stove, the warmth of the fire flickering across her face. She opened Thomas's journal, her dark fingers turning the pages with care. Beside it, she laid her own notebook, a fresh one. On the first page, she wrote 3 words in bold, steady hand: "No retreat, ever." Then beneath it, she began her list: security, traps, supplies, communications. Her mind worked methodically, her heart unyielding. The campaign against her had begun, but they had made one mistake. They thought she would fold. They thought the darkness could drive her from her land. They had not counted on the fire that burned within her still. The night after Daisy's burial was long and sleepless. Clara sat at the kitchen table beneath the dim glow of the lamp, the worn cover of Thomas's journal resting under her fingertips. The walls of the house seemed to press inward, the silence of the fields outside heavier than ever. She had faced down enemies before in foreign lands, in unfamiliar cities, in darkened rooms where every sound mattered. But this fight was different. It was personal. It was home. The attacks would escalate. Of that she had no doubt. Clara pushed back from the table and rose to her feet. Her body moved slowly, a quiet determination guiding every step. She crossed the house to the pantry. In the far corner, beneath a loose floorboard, rested a small metal box, its edges worn smooth by years of handling. Her heart beat faster as she knelt and pried it free. The lid creaked open beneath her touch, revealing the tools of an old life, a set of maps, a stack of field notes, and beneath them, wrapped in oiled cloth, her Remington 700. For a long moment, Clara simply stared. Her breath came slow and deep. She unwrapped the rifle with care, her dark fingers moving reverently across the cool steel. The weapon had been her companion through 12 years of combat. It had steadied her hand when nerves threatened to shake. It had whispered in her ear when fear rose too high. Now, as her fingers traced the familiar grooves of the stock, her heart swelled not with dread, but with a renewed clarity. She was not helpless. She had never been helpless. Clara laid the rifle across her lap and reached for the phone. Marcus answered on the first ring. "Mama," her voice was steady low. "Son, I need you here." A beat of silence, then his voice tight with understanding. "I'm coming." The call ended without another word. Clara cradled the rifle in her arms for a moment longer, then rose and began to move. She worked through the night. The steady clack of metal, the scent of oil and powder filled the room. Each motion was deliberate, checking the bolt, aligning the scope, testing the trigger pull. Her hands, though older, remembered the work well. At dawn, the rumble of an engine echoed down the gravel drive. Clara stepped onto the porch as Marcus's truck came into view, headlights slicing through the morning fog. He parked near the barn and climbed out, his movements quick and tense. He crossed to her in 3 strides. "You all right?" Clara gave a small nod. "They killed Daisy, cut the water line, slashed my tire, and the town's gone cold." Marcus's jaw clenched, the muscle working beneath his skin. "They've started squeezing, trying to scare you off." "I know," Clara said softly, "but they miscalculated." Marcus looked her over, noting the rifle in her arms. His voice softened. "You pulled her out." "I had to." He met her gaze. No more needed saying. They moved inside the house, already humming with quiet purpose. Clara spread the old maps across the table, while Marcus unpacked his gear cameras, tripwire spools, 2-way radios, a small jamming device. Together they built their plan. They began with the fields. Clara led the way, her stride steady despite the cold in her knees. Marcus followed close behind, rolling out twine and marking key distances. She stopped near the east fence line, scanning the rise beyond the trees. "First firing position there," she said, voice calm. "Good elevation. Covers the road." Marcus nodded, setting a marker. They worked methodically, marking angles of fire lines of sight, fallback routes. Near the old well house, Clara paused. Set the first camera here. They'll come from this side. Count on it. Marcus set the small device, angling it beneath the eaves where it would remain hidden. By midday, the perimeter was fully mapped. Then came the traps. Together, mother and son strung fine copper wire at shin height through the underbrush. They buried spikes beneath loose soil, rigged cans of nails, and gravel to trigger on pressure plates. Each trap was carefully placed, not to maim, but to slow, to warn. At dusk, they moved inside. Clara stood watch as Marcus installed the radio jammer beneath the kitchen counter. It won't block everything, he said, but it'll knock out cell signals in most comms once we flip it on. That's enough. Clara's voice held no fear, only resolve. When the last piece was in place, they sat on the porch together, the sky painted in deep streaks of orange and violet. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Clara reached over her hand, resting on Marcus's arm. You know they might come hard. I know. You don't have to stay. Marcus turned, his dark eyes fierce beneath the brim of his hat. This is our fight, Mama. I don't run. She smiled, then small, tired, proud. You've grown strong. Because of you. The wind stirred the trees, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke across the fields. Clara straightened her gaze, sweeping the darkening land. We're ready now. Let them come. Marcus rose, laying a hand on her shoulder. They won't know what hit them. That night, Clara slept with the Remington resting beside her bed, the weight of it a comfort more than a burden. Marcus kept vigil in the living room, eyes flicking between the camera feeds on the small monitor. The house, the land, every inch was prepared. They had faced this kind of darkness before, in far-off places, in battles fought without fanfare or thanks. Now the battle had come home, and together mother and son would stand. No retreat, no surrender. The night was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your skin, makes the hairs at the back of your neck stand. Clara felt it as she moved across the second-floor landing, the weight of the Remington steady in her arms. She paused by the window and scanned the tree line. Nothing yet. Inside the living room, Marcus sat hunched over the monitor. 4 camera feeds blinked back at him, grainy images of dark fields and empty roads. He glanced up as Clara entered. Anything? Not yet, she said softly. He nodded, but both of them knew the waiting was almost over. An hour earlier, the cameras had caught a brief glimpse, 2 unfamiliar vehicles parked along the county road lights, off men moving in and out of the shadows. Clara had felt it in her bones then. Tonight was the night. She laid a hand on Marcus's shoulder, her voice low. I'm going up. You stay sharp down here. He met her gaze and gave a single nod. You too, Mama. She moved out onto the porch and crossed the yard, boots crunching softly against the gravel. Her heart beat steady, not fast, not slow, just ready. The old water tower rose at the edge of the north field, rusted and lean, but still sound. Clara climbed the ladder with sure hands, rifle slung across her back. At the top, she settled into position behind the rail. The Remington lay across a folded blanket scope trained on the drive. From here, she had the best angle one Thomas had shown her years ago. Below, Marcus slipped into the bunker they had prepared beneath the livestock shed. Reinforced walls, backup comms, and an escape tunnel that led to the tree line if things turned bad. They were ready. A low buzz on the radio broke the stillness. Marcus's voice came through calm and sharp. Movement. Coming fast. Clara adjusted her grip and pressed her cheek to the stock. Then she saw them. 3 black SUVs barreling down the road, headlights off, engines snarling. The first one bounced hard over the ditch and swung into the drive, followed by 2 more. Clara's heart thumped once heavy in her chest. Here we go, she whispered. The vehicles stopped short of the house doors flung open. 11 men spilled out faces, hard eyes, cold rifles, and sidearms gleaming under the faint moonlight. They moved in formation, silent and efficient. Not locals, not amateurs. Marcus's voice crackled through again. 11 targets. I count 2 heavies. 1 leader. Clara exhaled through her nose, steady and slow. They're yours if they get close, she replied. First one is mine. Her eyes locked onto the man moving point. Tall, broad shoulders, fast but too confident. He led the pack, scanning left and right, rifle raised. Clara adjusted the scope. 1 breath, 1 squeeze. The first shot rang out sharp, clean, deadly. The point man dropped instantly, body crumpling into the dirt without a sound. The others froze. Confusion spread across their ranks as they scanned the darkness. Then chaos. Marcus triggered 2 tripwires by the southern fence. Flares burst overhead, bathing the yard in harsh red light. Shadows jumped and twisted across the ground. The intruders split, some diving for cover, others rushing forward blindly. Clara chambered another round, breath calm. A second man sprinted toward the barn, wrong move. She squeezed the trigger again. The shot punched through his side, spinning him to the ground. Marcus's voice came through. 3 heading east. I'm moving. In the bunker, Marcus flipped the jammer on communications, for the attackers went dead. No signals and no signals out. He grabbed his rifle and moved through the reinforced crawl space, emerging behind the goat pens. He caught 2 men trying to flank the house. One went down with a short burst to the knee, screaming into the dirt. The second spun too late. Marcus closed the distance, slammed the man against the fence post, and pinned him with a sharp blow to the temple. 2 down. 1 captured Marcus, radioed. In the tower, Clara shifted positions. The leader had stepped into view, now closer to the house, barking orders in clipped tones. Her eyes narrowed. Clayton Briggs. She had seen his picture in the folder. Marcus had brought a corporate enforcer with a long record of making landowners disappear. Clara exhaled again. Not tonight. Briggs ducked behind a tractor, motioning 2 men to advance. Clara held her shot. Too risky. Instead, she watched, waited. Marcus moved through the shadows, silent as a wraith. He caught sight of Briggs and 2 others near the tractor. One of the attackers turned. Marcus fired low, dropping him with a clean leg shot. The second froze, raising his rifle. Marcus slammed into him, knocking the weapon free and locking the man in a chokehold. Briggs spun, weapon raised, only to meet the cold barrel of Marcus's sidearm. "Drop it," Marcus said, voice low and lethal. Briggs hesitated. "Drop it." The rifle clattered to the ground. Marcus zip-tied Briggs' hands and shoved him to his knees. "Got the leader," Marcus radioed. Clara smiled faintly. "Good work, son." The fight wasn't over. 2 more attackers fled toward the woods. Clara tracked them through the scope but held her fire. No clean shot. Instead, she radioed down. 2 runners east. "Let 'em go. We've got what we need." For 20 more minutes, the yard remained tense. Lights flickering, shadows shifting. But no new movement came. At last, Clara lowered her rifle, her body aching but strong. She climbed down every step, deliberate, breath calm. Marcus met her by the porch, a grim smile on his face. 3 captured. Rest her down or gone. He motioned to Briggs, now bound and glaring. Clayton Briggs in the flesh. Clara studied him, her gaze hard. "You picked the wrong farm." Briggs' jaw clenched, sweat streaking his face. Clara turned to Marcus. "Secure them. We'll call it in at first light." He nodded. As dawn crept over the fields, the Daniels farm stood quiet once more. But not broken. Mother and son walked the perimeter together, eyes scanning every inch. They had stood, they had fought, and they had won for now. Morning light had barely crept across the Daniels farm when Clara and Marcus stood in the barn facing the 3 captives. The air inside was cold and still. Dust hung in thin streaks where sunlight slipped through the boards. Clayton Briggs sat bound to a steel chair bolted to the floor, hands zip-tied behind his back, a smear of dried blood at the corner of his mouth. His gray suit jacket hung crooked on his shoulders, dirt and sweat staining the fabric. To his left, 2 of his men sat slumped in their chairs, wrists bound, faces drawn and hollow, after a night they would not soon forget. Clara stood with her arms crossed, the Remington resting against the wall nearby. Marcus stood beside her, arms loose at his sides, but his eyes sharp and steady. No words were spoken for a long moment. Clayton shifted in his seat, breaking the silence with a ragged breath. "You've made a mistake," he said hoarsely. "You think you can hold me here. You don't know who you're messing with." Clara's voice came cool and clear. "We know exactly who we're dealing with." She stepped forward, her boots echoing on the concrete floor, her gaze locked on his, unblinking. "Talk." Clayton's jaw tightened. He glanced at Marcus, then back to Clara. "Law won't protect you," he said. "You shoot one of us." Marcus cut him off, his voice calm but hard. "No one's getting shot unless they force it. But you will talk." Clayton swallowed. Sweat beaded along his brow. "This ain't about you," he muttered. "This is bigger. You're in the way." Clara took another step forward. "Why?" she asked, voice low. "Why come after my land? Why now?" Clayton looked away. Marcus leaned in, voice dropping to a quiet threat. "You saw what happened last night. You think you'll walk away if you stay quiet? You know better." Clayton let out a harsh breath, shoulders sagging. The fight had drained from him. He looked back at Clara, something colder now behind his eyes. "This land sits on a high-yield gas pocket," he said. "Been known for years. Your husband knew. He tried to bury the reports, thought he could keep it quiet." Clara's heart clenched, but her voice remained steady. My husband did what was right. Clayton gave a bitter smile. He slowed it down. Too long. Word got out. Money started moving. Deals started getting made. Marcus's fists clenched at his sides. Who, he demanded. Who's behind this? Clayton hesitated, lips pressed tight. Clara's voice sharpened. Who gave the orders, Briggs? He met her gaze, something flickering in his expression. Fear, shame, anger. Sheriff Maynard, he said, finally, voice rough. And others. County officials. Some on the state board. They set it up. My crew, we were brought in to speed things along. Clara's breath caught. The room seemed to narrow. Marcus stepped closer. You're saying Sheriff Maynard ordered this? Clayton nodded once. He's been buying folks off for years. Pushed through fake condemnations, false liens. Landowners disappear. Accidents happen. Clara's voice dropped to a near whisper. My husband. His accident. Clayton's face tightened. He looked away. It wasn't an accident. The words hit like a blow. Clara staggered back a step, one hand bracing against the table. Her chest ached a sharp, hollow ache. She had known deep down. But hearing it now, spoken aloud, it was a wound reopened. Marcus reached for her, his hand closing gently over hers. Mama. She gripped his hand tightly, knuckles white. The ache in her chest burned hotter now, not grief, but fury. A fire long banked flared to life. Her voice came low, steady, sharp as steel. You killed my husband for this gas. Clayton's head dropped. He said nothing. Marcus's voice was tight with controlled rage. We're going to bring this whole damn thing down. Clara squeezed his hand. Her voice was calm, but every word was laced with purpose. We'll bring it down. The right way. She stepped forward once more, face inches from Clayton's. You'll sign a statement. You'll name every name. Sheriff Maynard, every official, every buyer. Clayton looked up, eyes dull. You think that'll stop them? He rasped. Clara's voice did not waver. It'll start. Marcus released her hand and stepped to the side. We're calling the state investigator. You'll talk Briggs, or you'll rot. Clayton sagged in the chair, knowing he had no more cards to play. Clara turned to Marcus, her voice quiet but firm. Call them. He nodded. As he reached for the radio, Clara stood still, her heart pounding. Pain coursed through her sharp and raw, but beneath it burned a deeper strength. They had taken Thomas from her. They had tried to take her land, her life. But now she had names. She had the truth. And she had her son at her side. Marcus gripped her shoulder, gently, voice low. We'll make them pay, Mama. She looked at him, pride shining through the tears in her eyes. We will. No power, no badge, no bribe would stop them now. The fight had just begun. The sun was just rising when Marcus finished the call. He set the radio down on the kitchen table, exhaled through his nose, and looked over at his mother. They're sending a team. Federal. Clara stood at the sink, her hand steady as she poured 2 mugs of black coffee. They need to move fast, she said, before word gets out. She handed Marcus a mug, her dark fingers wrapping around the warmth of her own. Across the room, Thomas's old journal sat open beside a thick folder of notes Marcus had compiled Clayton Briggs's taped confession names, dates, contracts, land records. It was damning. But damning wasn't enough. It had to move. It had to be seen. Clara's voice broke the silence. We call Harper. Marcus nodded. Harper Monroe wasn't just any lawyer. She was a fighter, a black woman who had spent the last decade going after crooked land grabs across the state, the kind of attorney who knew how the game was played and how to break it. Within the hour, they had her on a secure video call. Harper's face filled the screen, sharp eyes framed by braids pulled tight behind her head. Clara. Marcus. You all right? We're standing, Clara said calmly. Marcus leaned forward. We've got something. Big. Sheriff Maynard, Southern Energy Ventures, county officials. We caught them in the act. Harper's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. You have proof we do. Marcus slid a stack of documents into frame. Clara followed with the digital drive, its red light blinking softly. Harper watched in silence. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. This is more than enough, she said. But you need to understand this won't stay quiet once it moves. There will be blowback. Clara's voice was cool as steel. Let them come. We're done waiting. Harper smiled, faintly, respect in her eyes. Then let's do this right. I'll file with the state. Simultaneously, we leak this to the press, trusted sources only, and we notify the feds. If they move first, the locals won't have time to cover their tracks. Marcus nodded. When now? Harper's fingers flew across her keyboard. Send me full files. And, Clara, if you have personal statements, records, anything your husband left, include it. His death changes the tone of this case. Clara's eyes narrowed, her jaw tight. "You'll have everything." Within the hour, Marcus had uploaded the files. Clara included scans from Thomas's journal entries about the gas deposits, notes about county meetings, his final warnings before the so-called accident. Harper's reply came swift. "Received. I've filed federal whistleblower protection for you both. You'll be contacted soon." Clara closed the laptop with a soft click. The fight was no longer theirs alone. For the first time in weeks, a faint sense of relief washed through her. Not ease, but momentum. Later that afternoon, the first news hit. A small independent outlet published the initial story. Anonymous sources documented corruption, a systemic effort to seize black-owned farmland. Clara's name was not mentioned, but those who knew could read between the lines. By evening, the story had spread state outlets, regional networks, even a few national reporters picked it up. Southern Energy Ventures declined to comment. Sheriff Maynard's office released a thin statement denying any wrongdoing. But it was too late. The next morning, just after dawn, Clara stood on the porch sipping her coffee when the convoy arrived. Black SUVs this time with federal plates. Agents in dark jackets fanned out quickly, moving with practiced efficiency. Marcus stood beside her, pride and resolve in his eyes. "They're here," he said quietly. Clara nodded. "Good." Within minutes, agents were sweeping through the county records office. Another team hit Southern Energy's local headquarters. Boxes of documents carried out in plain view of the cameras already circling the scene. But the most satisfying moment came just before noon. Harper had texted Marcus a single line, "Watch the courthouse." They did live feed streaming on Marcus's laptop. Sheriff Maynard, pale and sweating, was led from his office in cuffs. The sight hit Clara like a breath of fresh air. Her voice came soft but certain. "Thomas," she whispered, "we got them." Marcus placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You ain't alone in this anymore, Mama." For the first time in too long, Clara allowed herself a small smile. Across the state, the story exploded. Community groups rallied. Civil rights attorneys weighed in. Black farmers from neighboring counties reached out, offering support and sharing their own stories. One by one, the walls that had protected the powerful began to crack. In the barn that evening, Clara and Marcus sat together, the soft hum of the radio in the background. Marcus leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Clara looked at him, pride warming her chest. "It does. But we're not finished." He smiled. "No, but we're further than we've ever been." For the first time, the weight on Clara's shoulders felt lighter. Not gone, but lighter. Justice had come late, but it had come. And this time, they would see it through. Together. The wind carried a softer sound across the Daniels farm now. No longer a warning, no longer the cold breath of fear. It was lighter, almost tender. 3 months had passed since the raids and the arrests. The trials had been swift. With Clayton Briggs's confession and the weight of federal evidence, the network of corruption had crumbled. Sheriff Maynard had been sentenced, along with several county officials and executives from Southern Energy Ventures. And Clara Daniels had won. The court's ruling had come down just 2 days ago. Permanent ownership, federally protected, no future claims allowed. The land was hers. Forever. Now, standing beneath the early morning sun, Clara breathed in the clean air of her fields. She held the court document in her hands, an official record of what she had always known in her heart. This land belonged to her family, and no man would take it again. Marcus stood beside her, eyes shining with quiet pride. "They can't touch it now, Mama," he said. Clara smiled softly, lines easing from her face. "No, they can't." But this was not an ending. It was a beginning. Together, they had already started the next chapter. Marcus had formed the Daniels Land Trust, an initiative dedicated to protecting black-owned land across the county. Word had spread fast. Families who had faced similar threats reached out, many for the first time in years. "Every acre we protect is a victory," Marcus had said. Clara had agreed. The fight was bigger than her, bigger than this farm. And now, with justice in hand, it was time to build. That morning, they gathered near the West Field. A new foundation had been laid, a small community house, its frame rising clean and strong against the sky. Marcus stood with a small team of volunteers, many of them veterans. "It's almost done, Mama," he said. "First room will be ready by next month." Clara watched as the young men and women hammered, measured, painted. "This will be a good place," she said softly. It would be more than a house. It would be a haven for veterans returning home, for landowners needing guidance, for any soul looking to stand their ground. The sense of purpose filled the air. Later that afternoon, Clara stood beneath the old Bodhi tree, its branches thinner, now its leaves fewer. The tree had seen so much laughter, loss, endurance. But today she carried a small sapling in her arms. Marcus joined her hands deep in the soil as he prepared the ground. "You sure about this, Mama?" She nodded. "It's time." Together they knelt beside the grave where Thomas rested beneath a simple stone. Clara's fingers traced the engraving. "Beloved husband, forever protector." She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying her breath. Then with gentle hands she placed the young Bodhi tree in the earth. Marcus packed the soil around it, his movements slow and sure. When they finished, Clara stood wiping her hands on her jeans. For the first time in years, her smile came easily. "New roots," she said. Marcus took her hand and squeezed it gently. "We've come a long way, Mama." Her eyes softened as she looked at him. "And you've made me proud." They stood in silence for a moment, the wind rustling the young leaves above them. Around them, the land stretched wide and open, strong. The battles had been hard. The scars would remain. But Clara knew now that her pain had not been wasted. It had shaped something new, something lasting. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the fields, Clara and Marcus walked back toward the house. The porch light glowed warm against the dusk. In the distance, the sounds of hammers echoed from the new house, voices raised in laughter in purpose. Justice had come. And with it, a future. As Clara stepped onto the porch, she paused and looked out once more at the land she loved. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Every small victory matters," she said, "and every memory carries us forward." Marcus smiled. "Then let's keep moving forward, Mama." Together they would, and the land would remember, not as a place of pain, but as a place of hope. The sun had just begun to crest over the far tree line, casting long gold beams across the Daniels farm. Morning dew clung to the blades of grass, shimmering beneath the light. The air was crisp and still. Clara stood at the edge of her porch, leaning slightly on a wooden cane Marcus had crafted by hand. The smooth grain fit perfectly beneath her fingers. Her body had grown older, the aches sharper than they once were. But her spirit, her will remained unbroken. She drew in a slow breath, eyes sweeping over the land. The fields stretched wide and strong, no longer marred by fear or the shadows of corruption. By the newly built house near the western lot, Marcus and several young veterans were already at work. She watched them from a distance, their movements steady, and sure as they moved, lumber-secured fencing and tended the growing garden nearby. These were men and women who had fought their own wars, some on distant soil, some within their own hearts. Now they had found a place here, a purpose. And Clara had found hers too. She stepped off the porch slowly, the cane clicking softly against the old boards. Her boots crunched over the gravel as she moved toward the fields. Her gait was deliberate. Each step held weight, not from frailty, but from presence. Marcus looked up as she approached. "Mornin', Mama," he called, gently setting down a hammer. Clara gave a faint smile. "Mornin', son." One of the young veterans, Lena, a wiry woman with a scar running along her left cheek, tipped her head in respect. "Morning, Miss Clara." Clara nodded. She walked past them with slow determination, her cane tapping rhythmically. She moved through the rows of young crops, past the freshly painted fence line that had once been a battleground, past the small memorial stone by the old Bodhi tree sapling, now growing tall and strong. Her fingers brushed the leaves as she passed, her heart swelling with memory and quiet pride. She continued on toward the northern field. This had always been her ritual, to walk the land at first light, to remind herself and anyone watching that this ground stood guarded, not by fences, not by law, but by the legacy of a family that refused to be erased. As she reached the highest ridge near the eastern slope, Clara paused. The breeze stirred gently around her, rustling the tall grass. She planted the cane firmly in the soil, standing tall against the morning light. Her voice came low, a whisper meant only for the land, and perhaps for the man whose spirit she still carried within her. "I'm still watching." Her gaze swept outward, steady and sharp. Not hardened by bitterness, but strengthened by purpose, because justice was not a moment, it was a journey, and vigilance was not a burden, it was a choice. Below her, the young veterans continued their work, unaware of her quiet vow. Marcus glanced up, once seeing his mother standing tall against the sky. His chest tightened with pride. They had fought for this. They had bled for this. And they would guard it for as long as breath remained. The camera would rise, then lifting slowly past Clara's figure, past the fields, stretching wide and free. The house, the trust office, the small gathering of workers moving with quiet dedication, then higher still, until the farm lay spread beneath a vast sky, serene but vigilant, a place of peace but never of complacency, because protecting what is right is a battle without end, and some sentinels never sleep. The story of Clara and her son Marcus is not just about one family's fight for their land. It is a story about courage passed down through generations, about the strength to stand tall when the world tries to push you down, about honoring the memory of loved ones by protecting what they built with love, with sweat, with sacrifice. And perhaps it reminds us all that some things in life are worth defending, not because of their price, but because of their meaning. Now, I'd like to ask you, if you were in Clara's place, would you have had the strength to keep going? What would you choose to protect no matter what the cost? If this story touched you, I hope you'll leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your hopes, your experiences, so we can keep this conversation alive. And if you believe in standing up for what is right, in honoring family, in the quiet but powerful fight for justice, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Together we can share more stories that inspire, heal, and remind us that resilience has no age, and justice is a light worth carrying forward. Thank you for being here, and thank you for listening.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.